G'day guys, how are we? Welcome to Talking Boxing, night number 2, if you will. It is Tuesday, November the 8th, 2022, and we've got a little bit of an encore show tonight because we've got a little bit of a treat. Just waiting for him to come on, by the way. He's a little bit stuck, but he'll be on in a minute or two. The one and only Mike Altamura. So I'm just going to give him a little bit of a wind-up before he actually comes on the show. What we're going to do, normally on a Tuesday night, we record classic fights and dream fights with Tassie away and Peter away. It's been a little bit going on. So I thought what we do, as I said, something a little bit different is to just use the hour that we normally put into these shows to get Mike on and just go through a little bit about what goes through his brain. So if you're not familiar with Mike Altamura, he's legitimately a walking encyclopedia. I know I always joke about it on some of our shows, but there's not many people that I've ever met that know more than Mike Altamura, if any, and he just knows everything about everything when it comes to boxing. Not sure he's had much of a life outside of boxing, to be honest, but we can ask him tonight. But look, he's a great guy, and as I said, he'll be on in a second. And what we're going to do tonight, I think I've done it on this show in the last few weeks. We've got his five favourite fighters of all time. So not the 5 greatest, his 5 favourite fighters, his 5 favourite fights themselves of all time. And then probably the most important one that I did a week or two ago, it was the 10 greatest Aussie performances of all time. And the reason I didn't call it wins of all time, because in my top 10, I had Jeff Fennick and Azuma Nelson, which was fight number 1, which is a draw. And of course, Troy Waters against Terry Norris, so in which he got beaten in a third round, like war. So it was unbelievable. So we're going to operate it sort of like an everyday talking boxing show, like I do on a Monday night. He'll obviously go through everything that he wants to do, but at the same time, if you've got a comment or a question or whatever you want to throw at Mike, he'll be there to do it for you. But while we're waiting on Mike, it should only be another minute or so. Next Monday night, I forgot to mention it last night, we will have Shotgun Shannon O'Connell live on the show on Monday night. She's heading off, I think, in about 2 weeks, to go to England for a camp. I think she's staying in Manchester ahead of her fight with Ebony Bridges. I spoke with her the other day, so she's actually going to come on next week live, not only to answer some questions and whatever you guys have got to throw at her, but she'll also, like a normal show, she'll go through our normal Monday agenda, all the fights from the weekend, the upcoming fights, her opinion on different things. Might even ask her opinion on the top 50 that was on the weekend that I went through last night, where she was ranked number 15, I think it was. And I think Shanika Johnson and Ebony Bridges were both ranked in front of her, so I'm not sure she would really like that or those rankings. I think she might have even been put back to 18 by the time fans had to say, so she won't be very happy. But anyway, so she's on next Monday night, so make sure you tune in. I'll put it on our socials and everything like that. But it will just be a little bit different. I know the concept is to have me interacting with you guys, but nothing will change. We'll have her on with a few different opinions. And if you guys, as I said, have got some questions or comments that you want to throw at her, then she'll be there. Some other news at the moment, you would have seen our dream fights dropped at the moment. Make sure you check it out. Robbie Pete and Lester Ellis. An unbelievable response yesterday, by the way. It's probably our most voted on fight that we've ever had. Right up until the last sort of hour or so before the poll ran out, they were neck and neck. I won't tell you who won. We'll go into that next week. But it was very, very, very close. So Mike is actually on his way on now. So I'm going to put him in the green room. Where are we? So we've got him in number 3. I'm going to bring him on now. And here he is. There he is. Mike Altamura, how are we, mate?
I'm very, very well, Lyndon. Sorry I'm a couple minutes late.
That's fine.
I was fretting over these big questions that you're going to be presenting me with today. At least you gave me a heads up in advance and you didn't put me on the spot. But when I work any of these kind of programs, there's always somebody that's dear to my heart that is somehow offended I haven't incorporated them.
It's a tough one, isn't it?
In advance, I apologize. Please forgive me. I'm only human. But I'm looking forward to the next hour.
It should be good, mate. I've just sort of filled everyone in on, firstly, a little bit of your credentials. You've obviously been around a long time, involved in the sport a long time, and you know your stuff. So this is why I said we normally have our classic fights and dream fights tonight. So it's great to have you part of it, mate, to have the whole hour to yourself to go through it. So again, just to recap, your top five favourite fighters of all time, and then the top five favourite fights of all time. It's a bit of a mouthful. And then we'll go through your top 10 greatest Aussie performances. And there's been plenty over the years, so I'm really keen to see who you've got. I've got my list there. I'll quickly give you a look at when you do yours. But yeah, it'd be interesting to see what you think. I've got a suspicion yours might maybe go back a few more years than mine. But sounds good, mate. So I'm gathering you've done your homework on it all. You're all ready to go?
Yeah, so, and just one thing, on the greatest Australian performances, I've pretty much neglected, and I know a lot of the historians will be upset or dissatisfied with what I say, but I've pretty much neglected anything from like the 1800s to early 1900s, just because of the fact that it's hard to put a lot of that era in context. So, for example, young Griffo went 10 rounds with Joe Gans, a draw, which technically should be the greatest Australian performance ever because Joe Gans is one of the greatest fighters ever. But in context, the pre-arrangement was that if there was no knockout, it would be a 10-round draw. So it's not like there was any judging or anything. So you can't stack that up in context to, say, compare to a modern victory where boxing's just a completely different era. So anyways, let's get to it. I'm happy to...
Just firstly, though, Mike, you've got a question from there. Shane, just very quickly, because we Barney Ross. Now, hey, Shane, I'm wrapped that you know all about Barney Ross. Mike, just quickly, is he in your list anymore, or should you quickly address it now?
Well, Barney Ross would be in my top, say, somewhere between the top 20 to top 40 greatest fighters of all time.
Time?
Yeah, I would need to sit down and figure it out. But you've got to also look at, when you look at greatness, a big part of encapsulating the greatness is the attraction. And Barney Ross was a huge attraction in his time. So it's definitely saying, look, Lyndon gives me a lot of stick when on the Classic Fights programs I present about from the 1930s where there's only highlights. But this just reflects to me that maybe I need to make that my focus. Because I know yourself and Tassie, when he decides to appear, or Splinters Maniatis, you guys more go like 90s, 2000s and so forth.
70s maybe. But yeah, look, I must admit, mate, I even though I do have an understanding about that, I am one of the ones that my boxing life started in the 70s. So I must admit I'm probably stuck in the 70s and 80s and 90s a little bit. But that's why I really wanted you to do it, because even though I've done my list, it doesn't go past, as I said, probably the 70s.
Yeah, and it's all subjective. So there's things that we'll talk about. I'm sure that there's a few performances I've overlooked, and even I think people will be surprised because the kind of manager that I am, my preference is to take on fighters or to guide fighters that are in low impact fights. And I've managed the likes of Lenny Zapovenia, who obviously it's hard in mouth for 12 rounds, but my favourite guys are more defensive fighters to work with. But when you look at my list of all-time favourite fighters, it's completely different. So, and I would have loved the opportunity to manage every one of those athletes, but I know that they would have aged me considerably if I had them on my books.
All right, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to keep taking notes here. And again, a little disclaimer, I didn't want to know your top five or your list. I wanted to be like the viewers out there and watch live. I'll keep a bit of a count in our comment section and I'll put up the end, and then we can give everyone a bit of a look. But let's start. Number 5, your top or your favourite fighter of all time. Number 5.
You're never going to get this one, I know, because people in Japan are actually shocked when I mention the guy's name.
Japan?
Yeah, it's Takanori Hatakeyama. 24 wins, 2 losses, 3 draws, for those people that don't know. Former WBA 135-pound world champion in the late 90s. Just think, to me, he's a combination of Arturo Gatti and Lester Ellis, how he fights. Just all action, typical of them rough and tumble Japanese samurai warriors that just come in and bring the heat. Anyone that questions why I would put this guy on a list in terms of entertainment, go and watch his bout against Gilbert Serrano when he won the WBA lightweight world title. So he got hammered, and when I say he got hammered, his eyes on the verge of closing. He got knocked from pillar to post for the first 4 rounds in that bout. It looked like a complete mismatch. Comes back in the 5th, drops Serrano heavy, loses the 6th, comes back, drops Serrano again in the 7th, 3 times in the 8th round to claim the world title. And it's fights like that that epitomise the spirit of Hatakeyama. He only had 29 professional bouts, but probably 15 of them are must-watch TV.
How do we spell it, Mike, just so I get it right?
H-A-T.
H-A-T.
A-K.
A-K.
E-Y.
E-Y, okay.
Yeah. A-M-A. Takanori Hatakeyama.
And I'll put it up here, actually. So what was his first name, sorry?
Takanori, so T-A-K-A-N-O-R-I.
N-O-R-I, okay. Takanori, yep, okay. All right, so I'm keeping a Castillo-Corrales type fight. So Carl here, Carl Hunter Hansen, I think obviously he knows what he's talking about there. He's obviously seen the fight. I must admit I haven't seen that fight. I will say, Mike.
You got to watch it. I mean,
Okay.
like I said, then you go watch his other fights with Sakamoto, who was another Japanese warrior of that time. He had when he fought Luck Vassim, he was cooked at the weight at 130, but Luck Vassim was also a hell of a fighter, and that's not his best performance to watch, but you still look at how admirable, even when he's hurt and down and out, he still keeps coming, all offense. Just a guy that didn't know how to step backwards and brought the heat. The best part is, so I've been to Japan almost 20 times, and finally about 3 trips back, I managed to track him down. And
to spend,
to be able to spend half a day with one of my childhood heroes, and for him to be just such a warm and humble gladiator of the squared circle, and to see him doing well in life, because you worry about these guys that take so much punishment in their careers, what kind of long-term effect. But he runs his own gym. He's got a podcast with Shinji Takahara, who of course beat a number of Australians, Craig Trotter, Alex Tui, en route to winning the WBA middleweight world title. So him and Takahara run a gym together, and he's actually doing really well. So it was heartwarming to see that.
Yeah, all right. Well, I'll be checking that fight out. So make sure you give us a link after this, and I'll have a look. So they've had so many great champions, haven't they, Japan? So that, I must admit, mate, that's totally thrown me straight off the bat. So look forward to the next 4. Who you got? Number 4?
Number 4. Well, someone you know definitely, Arturo Gatti.
Oh yeah,
Arturo on the Gatti. I just think that Gatti, especially if you grew up on the fight game in the 90s. He was your go-to. There's a reason he was known as a human highlight reel, and he just brought it. Like most people know the 3 bouts with Mickey Ward. I don't even rate the 3 bouts with Ward in my top 3 or 4 Gatti fights.
So, so what would they be?
One of them may be featured in my favourite fights.
Oh, okay. Well, don't.
I'm not going to spoil that. But Gabriel Ellis was an outstanding fight.
Yeah.
I mean, he's on the cusp of being stopped, and then boom, left hook from hell. Good night. That bout, the 2 fights with Ivan Robinson, back and forth. Even Calvin Grove. I mean, Calvin Grove gave him hell of a lot of trouble. The first bout with Tracy Harris Patterson was just a real good technical fight, back and forth. Like Gatti just had a habit, time and again, of having these kind of encounters, and occasionally then would Thomas Damgard right at the end of his career, another one, which was a blood and guts kind of fight. Like it was just essentially the story of his career. If he didn't catch guys early with a left rip to the body, he was usually going to be bleeding from both eyes and be needing to walk through a lot of adversity to get the W.
All right. Yeah. No, I can't argue with that one. I think he'd been on the list of a lot of boxing fans out there, Arturo Gatti, and good reason. Yep. Number 3.
This is an easy one. Sugar Ray Leonard. I think that really, I think I've said this on the program previously. So when I was growing up, of the fabulous 4, it would have been Tommy Hearns.
So he was your favourite out of the 4. That's unusual.
Yeah, Hearns would have been my favourite, only because of so many highlight reel knockouts. I grew up, I'd watched the James Schuller bout, watched, of course, the knockouts of Quaver, Strand. They were on the Super Bout series.
Yeah.
And then even with the Leonard fight the first time around, I appreciated more Hearns. I was of the narrative that, maybe Hearns just ran out of steam. But then when you really go back and put the context of Leonard's career in perspective, for a guy that was 36-3-1 there's just endless super bouts.
Yeah,
It's
one
not,
after the other.
you know,
Yep.
you can't compare his record to people with similar records in different eras because essentially throughout the 80s, every time he stepped in the squared circle, with the exception of the bout with Kevin Howard, was really a top tier challenge. It was either, daring to be great, Donnie Lalonde stepping up to 168. It was, 168 and 175, but the fight was
They
at a
fought at
catch weight,
168, didn't they?
168. It was
But
either
yeah.
Darren, yeah, but it was for the light heavy belt too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was. He was always just stepping out of his comfort zone, and then just exquisite skills. But I think with Leonard, why I would edge in favour to him over, even though I love Pernell Whitaker and there's Floyd Mayweather and all these defensive stylists, but Leonard had the tools to be a defensive stylist, but he really loved to get in there and rumble. And there was fights like with Hagler, he knew he had to hold his ground, but not too long. He needed to keep shifting and turning and moving because he knew that with a guy that strong, it wasn't going to be smart. It was Russian roulette to stay on the inside. But for the most part, I mean, Leonard even, you look at, watch when he annexed the junior middleweight world title from Ayub Kalule, who's a terrific fighter. I mean, that's a real strong kid. I mean, Kalule out of Uganda, a real physically strong present. And Leonard took chances to stand in the pocket and hit him clean and push him back and gradually break him down. I just thought the ultimate showman, very, very classy inside and outside the ring. And he's everything we love about boxing. We saw it in later eras with the likes of Oscar De La Hoya, that always prepared to be great. Win, lose or draw, fight the absolute best.
And the thing about him too is, when you talk about a lot of the modern day greats like the De La Hoyas and those types of guys, they had multiple losses, a lot of them along the way, and there's nothing wrong with that because great fighters fighting great fighters, that happens. But the difference with Sugar Ray Leonard, the only one that got him was Duran. I know he obviously lost to Camacho and Norris and that later. That was when he was done. But at his peak, he fought Benitez and Duran and Hearns and Hagler and like you said, Kaluli and all those guys. The only one that got him was Duran.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at, doesn't matter. I mean, you've got people that can say that he waited out Hagler or whatever. It doesn't matter. I mean, Hagler, the fight before, defeated John Mugabe in an absolute war, and 7 years later, 6 years later, John Mugabe holds a version of the junior middleweight world title. So it's not as though Hagler was just beating completely hand-picked opponents, and that Leonard caught an old man. What was Hagler, 32 years of age when they fought?
32, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, people act like as if he was 45 and finished. I just think that...
Well, it's a good point, mate, because, he's 32, and these days we're talking about Crawford and Spence. They're both, Crawford 35 or something? So, anyway, that's the different mindset.
Spence is 34, right? 33 or 34?
Yeah, so... And then what was Pacquiao and Mayweather, both in their late 30s, I think, weren't they? So, Anyway. All right, mate, that's number 2. Oh, up to number 2.
You know who number 1 is. So number 2 is a pretty easy one because I've said it to you previously. Ray Boom Boom Mancini. So Boom Boom, and another guy that I grew up idolising him. He was my favourite foreign fighter off the Super Bout series. Of course, the tape had the twin bouts with Art Frias, his title capturing effort.
Did he go for about 2 minutes? Did he throw about 200 punches in about a minute?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, absolute war though. But yeah, he outlasted Frias, and then of course I had the tape of his first world title challenge against Aguayo, and I was all in on Team Mancini, not on Aguayo watching that. And you bought into the narrative. So he was a second generation fighter. His father, Lenny Mancini, was the number 1 lightweight contender in the world before he went to war, had shrapnel wounds in the war and come back, but was never the same fighter, never secured his world title shot. So Ray was en route to fulfilling his father's legacy. And it was just one of those stories. I know that then Ray's narrative kind of went on different paths. Of course, we had the very, very sad loss of Dooku Kim in a bout that, as I've said to Ray personally, had there been no tragedy to that bout, it would be a fight that's on repeat on ESPN Classic. And people continuously talk about just it being an outstanding battle of athleticism and skill and of heart and determination at the absolute highest level. But I think that, Ray was He was a TV darling in the early 80s, but he brought the heat every fight. He was a genuine fighter. He's another guy, you look at his record, and he ended up 29-5. 4 of the losses come right at the end. But he fought some real tough guys on the way up, and even as world champion, he was always prepared to take the toughest challenges. Yeah, absolutely.
Now, when you met him, Mike, was there a little bit of fanboy stuff going on there? I must admit, I met Vinny Pazienza once, and he was twice I've met him, and he was my all-time favourite fighter. And I was like a little girl when I met him. I was all flustered and everything else. And so, was that what you were like with Ray Mancini, or you were okay?
No, I was pretty good. Yeah, I was pretty good. Like Ray was good. The one that probably, even I'd have to go to my childhood to really get to a point that I was just kind of overwhelmed, and that was meeting George Foreman in '95.
Oh yeah,
so, yeah, that was one that I was just kind of starstruck. But pretty much everyone since, I think it's just for me, it's probably a little different because of consistently travelled and been amongst so many events and that.
Yeah.
You just constantly, you share locker rooms with these guys. You're in the same building with them. I actually get more excited when I see somebody that's unexpected. Not really the legends or the guys I idolise or that. Because I met Ray Leonard, and that was fantastic when we had the fighter meetings for a PBC event, and he was great. And I've become friends with, Antonio Tarver and guys like that, guys that I really looked up to growing up. But I think that the ones that get you are when it's guys that are under the radar. So like a few years back, I was in Japan. I'm in the gym and I see this veteran fighter walk in, and I'm like, man, that's Tsuyoshi Hamada. And like no one would know who Tsuyoshi Hamada is, but former was it WBA or WBC? Former WBA 140-pound world champion. Beat Ronnie Shields, great Ronnie Shields, who's more renowned trainer now. But anyways, like for me, it was more exciting the fact Tsuyoshi Hamada walked into the gym. Whereas had you told me he was going to be there, I would have been fine. I would have said, oh, cool. I would have gone up to him, hey, can we get a pic? Chatted to him a bit. Yep. But it was a fact that was unexpected, and it's like, wow, like this. I'm getting paid to be here. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm getting paid to be here, and I'm meeting guys that I mean, the kid in me who would flick through the magazines and see these Japanese fighters ranked 2 or 3 in the world in Ring Magazine, to then be able to actually be in their present and pick their brain and learn about their journey, there's nothing better.
Yeah, I had a little bit like that at the International Boxing Hall of Fame back in June. Of course, I had, it was Mayweather and Cotto and Jones and Hopkins and Mosley. They were all there. But I remember I ran into Marlon Starling, the Magic Man. Now, same thing, totally unexpected. He was just mingling in the crowd, and I literally walked into him. I wasn't watching where I was going. I literally walked into him, and I didn't say anything. But the guy I was actually with, Eddie Montavo, who's big in the women's side of things, I just sort of went like that, and he knew Marlon really well, so he actually introduced us, and I was wrapped because he was such a nice guy. No one recognised him, which was really surprising, because this is a guy, remember, he fought Donald Curry, Lloyd Honeyghan, Mark Breland, he was one of the best, and you just got to remember that fight he had with Lloyd Honeyghan when he absolutely took him apart and stopped Mark Breland and obviously had the draw. But I just remember you said about the kid coming out. The 12 or 13-year-old kid in me came out when I met him, because it wasn't like he was one of my favourite fighters, but I respected him so much. I just remember those fights, and you're right, when you meet someone unexpectedly, it really does make your day. So I hear you there, mate. Well, here we go, number 1, no surprise,
Master Blaster, Lester Ellis.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that.
It's a no-brainer. I mean, the first fighter's name I ever heard actually wasn't Lester Ellis. It was Graham Porky Brook, because he was my older brother's favourite fighter. But Lester was very, very tight with our family. So my dad had taken away a few of the junior state teams in the late 70s, and he had a few fighters in the same squad. Lester, when he was with Matt Quinn, would regularly be over for sparring and things of that nature. So I actually grew up knowing Lester and attending his fights and so forth. So there was always that affinity, and it's again another one that, as I got older, the appreciation really started to come. So like, yourself, like videotapes cost an absolute fortune in the 80s. And
yeah, they did.
So our family probably had a videotape collection of maybe 7 tapes of boxing.
Yeah.
There was maybe 80 tapes total, but maybe 7 tapes of boxing. And three of them were Lester Ellis fights. So there was the Juan Kilyu, there was Sashula, and there was Rod Sequenin.
Yeah.
And then I was actually 3.5. And then the half was like the first 7 rounds against Barry Michael, which was fine because it was better not to know the outcome of that fight.
But that's awesome that you've actually got your favourite fighter of all time, and you've actually got a relationship with him, and you know him really well. Obviously, your great relationship with the family in general. So that's an amazing sort of ability you got. I must admit, when I did mine, it was either Vinny Paz or Jeff Fennick was probably the number 2. Lester Ellis was definitely in there, but yeah, for me it was Jeff and Vinny Paz. But yeah, no, that's awesome, mate. I love the list. I'm sure Lester Ellis will probably like that. Just a quick one on another note. Did he happen to comment on the dream fight with Robbie Peden, or?
No, so actually, remember I told you Lester wouldn't watch any of the programs, but I know all the boys did. So all the Alice crew, all their promotional team watched the show and were appreciative of how we were remembering 2 legends of the sport. But actually, Bomber Peden called me yesterday, and remember I said to you, I felt secure in the fact that I know with the kind of gentlemen both are, they wouldn't care what my prediction was. And Bomber was beautiful. He's actually very complimentary of how we covered the program and the insights we had into his career. So that's what it's all about. I mean, even guys like I said to Bomber, and he probably thinks I'm lying, but I'm not. But like I remember when I was in grade 5, we had what was called earn and learn in the afternoon. So it was basically you run a little shop. So I had a sports store, and you sell your products, and you learn about money and investing and how to balance the books and so forth. And it was fun, but it was basically, on that day, it was 3-4 hours of that day. And anyways, it coincided with the Commonwealth Games. And I managed to talk our teacher into allowing us to watch Robbie Peden. Yeah, Robbie Peden. It was either the semi-final or the finals. I can't remember. I'd have to look at the dates. But I managed to talk our teacher into allowing us to watch Bomber Peden's fight in class. So think about that. To do that at 10 years of age, and then all these years later to be friends with him and to know I can call him anytime and go out for a cup of coffee or whatever, my heart's full because of that.
Yeah, I must. He rang me too. I actually sent him the link on YouTube and got him to check it out because I knew he probably is not really big on the social media or YouTube. So he must have watched it, and then he rang me. And I think the only thing that got him offside a little bit is that I commented about he's not probably been the most disciplined guy outside the ring, but he thought it was a pisser. He thought it was a great joke. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad the Alice crew were the same as well, because it was not, when we do these shows, it's never about which one you like the best, or it's never spiteful. It's just facts and figures and our opinion. So I'm glad that they all took it in the stride. A quick one, mate, before you move on to the next segment. Carl here has asked a question off just a little bit off topic there. Who you rate as Australia's best prospect across all weight divisions? I've got a little bit of a suspicion I know who you're going to say, but who do you think?
If you look at prospect as someone who's on the cusp of breaking into the world level, then I have to go with someone that's within our ranks, which would be Matteo Tapia. That's
what I thought you were going to say. Yep. Yeah, and he looked good in that last fight.
Yeah, absolutely. And we took a fight against another genuine prospect. I mean, Abdullah Mayweather has a future too. Yep. I think Australia's really rich in terms of the fighters coming through the ranks now. What I think is that just a lot of us in the country just need to know how to develop these kids over the journey and not be in a haste or in a rush.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? We tend to get a little bit impatient here in Australia, don't we? And if they're not fighting, great or top-rated fighters in about the 5th or 6th fight, we're wondering what's going on. And yeah, I think that's why obviously they need companies or guys like yourself to manage them to do it properly. Because it's just I think everyone's just in it's catch-22, isn't it? Because if you rush them in too quick, you're a bad manager, and if you don't match them up. If you don't give them or you give them too hard a fight, it's not a good manager. If you don't, then you're not a good manager. You can't really win, can you?
I still like, for the most part, to subscribe to one of the theories that the great manager Bob Spagnola preached to me. Of course, as I've told you, he managed the Canizales brothers, Orlando and Gabby Canizales, the Tate brothers, Thomas and Frank Tate, Lou Savarese. And Bob always said to me, when anyone ever questioned the level of competition he was putting his fighters in with on the way up, he said, look, I know what I signed. I know they can fight. I don't have to try and prove they can fight every outing. And I really think that that's smart, just to tick all the right boxes and to develop the talent right. You don't need to be throwing them in the deep end every fight.
Yeah, well, it's a classic case, isn't it, of you don't want them fighting for world titles, you want them in a position to win a world title. So there's a difference, isn't there? All right, mate, so we're on to the next segment. It is your 5 favourite fights of all time. I'm intrigued to hear this one.
Yeah, I'm just looking up at my order. Okay, so, yeah, I think I'm happy with that. Yep. Okay, so number 5.
Yep.
Arturo Gatti versus Wilson Rodriguez.
Well, not okay. When you said Gatti, I'm thinking, all right, well, that's easy, but okay. Who was it against?
Arturo Gatti versus Wilson Rodriguez. You don't remember that fight? Yeah. That's a fight that made his career. IBF world title fight. Gatti down in the second, cuts over both eyes, deducted points for low blows, right eye, huge mouse on the cusp of swelling shut, doctor on the cusp of stopping the fight, flattens Wilson Rodriguez with a left hook in round 6. That's a fight that made Gatti. That's what made him must-see TV on HBO. So, to me, I love going back and watching it because it's a shock to the commentators, the fire he's walking through. Whereas every fight later, it was an expectation. It was, it's another Gatti fight. He's bleeding. He's this. It was an expectation. Whereas that was a shock. So
just to clarify there too, guys, it's not, in your opinion, the 5 greatest fights of all time. It's your favourite fights of all time.
Yeah. So that's number 5.
Yep. All right, number 4.
Okay, so this one actually I was personally involved in the fight, so I matched the fight and I managed one of the participants, and I also was stuck at the venue till 3 a.m. while both participants were stitched up post-bout. So we go back. I'm just bringing up the date.
Yeah. It
would be the 3rd of April 2014. Lenny Zapavinya of Australia, who I managed, 30-2. Against Shuhei Tsuchiya of Japan, 15-2. Absolute samurai warrior. So Lenny, I once kidded, but there's a semblance of truth to it, that Lenny just needs to start shadow boxing in order for his eyes to swell.
He got cut every fight, didn't he?
Every fight. And so this was one of those nights where he actually struck first blood. He cut Tsuchiya in the 3rd round. So I was like relieved for once. I'm like, all right, the other guy's bleeding first. Then he knocked Tsuchiya down heavy in the 4th round. And like your typical kamikaze warriors that come out of Japan, Tsuchiya come rumbling back, and off one punch caused 2 cuts on Lenny's eye in round 6.
So that was we're both the Melbourne Pavilion.
Yeah, that was a Melbourne Pavilion. And so I'll give you the other context of that. I'll give you the other context of that post-fact.
Okay.
So anyways, they go back and forth exchanging bombs. Don't look at the scorecards on BoxRec because the rounds were nip and tuck. Lenny was nipping a lot of them, just taking them. But it was frightening every single round. And I remember at one point in that fight, I only seen it in Fox Sports. So Fox Sports go in the corner and they couldn't work out what Tommy McCurry was doing. And he's holding a spoon like this to Lenny's eye and pushing out the swelling, which the spoon does the same job as spoon does the same job as an end swell.
Yep.
It's actually if you look at the structure of it, it's easier to work it to the contour of your face.
Yeah, it makes sense.
He was able to massage the swelling out and keep Lenny in the fight. And then of course Lenny comes out and knocks him out in the 10th round. And it was one of those fights that it frightened me because the prolonged beating that Tsuchiya took the last few rounds, I was worried about his health, if he was ever going to be the same again. But there's a couple things. If you look at the video of the fight, I jump in the ring after the fight and I give Lenny a kiss on the top of his head, like right here. And then you see me go like this. Yeah, he had a cut right on that. So I kissed him on the head and his blood went straight in my mouth. But that was... And then post fact, thankfully, like I said, Tsuchiya was fine. His management were very good friends of mine.
Yeah.
We had to wait until the fights had concluded before they could both be stitched, and we were waiting at the venue till 3 a.m. Lenny had to be stitched over both eyes. Suchi had about 3 cuts. So I think he only had to be stitched on one, but he had to then be butterfly clipped on 2 of the other cuts. It was a brutal fight. It was the Australian Fight of the Year for 2014. But for me, it was satisfying for a number of reasons. I think that's the fight that really brought Lenny's upper back. You know, people remember what must-see TV he is because they had forgotten. But also, the people involved in the promotion of that event were questioning my judgment on the fight and thinking that I was just bringing in a rollover. And I said to him, like, if Lenny knocks the guy out in a round or two, he deserves credit for it. You shouldn't be thinking it's a mismatch or anything. I said, this guy's an absolute warrior. So, although it was a brutal fashion, to sit back and see a fight you matched have such a positive reaction around the world, to me, it was just a great feeling.
No, I'm going to check it out. I've never seen it, but I will be definitely checking it out for sure. I'm just typing that in there. All right, number 3.
This is another one you definitely haven't watched. You're going to check this one out.
All right.
Ezra Sellers, E-Z-R-A, Sellers,
E-Z.
S-E...
Yeah.
Yep, E-Z-R-A, Sellers, S-E-L-L-E-R-S. He was
Ezra
signed
Sellers,
to Square
yep.
Ring
American.
versus Carl the Cat Thompson, 26th of the 11th, 2001.
All right.
IBO, was the IBO Cruiserweight World title?
Who's it against?
Carl the Cat
Carl Thompson. Yep, it was for the IBO World Cruiserweight title. Yep.
This is a crazy fight. 6 knockdowns. This is one of the fights. So, to put it in context, earlier that year, my dad, at the absolute last minute, was leaving the venue, was asked to work the corner for a kid called Ahmed Popel.
This is in England, this fight.
Yeah.
Yep.
In England. So I'm just putting something in context. So Ahmed Popel passed away in that fight. He was winning the fight, collapsed in the fight, passed away.
Yeah.
And when I seen the death of the kid caused a lot of unraveling in my family. And when I seen how badly it affected my father, a lot of my passion for boxing dissipated the next 6 to 9 months. And it was this fight that brought me back. It was this fight really. I remember turning on the TV, just turned 18.
Just turned 18.
Yeah, so I'd managed a couple fighters already, but my heart wasn't in it. I was just kind of just doing it, not even part-time, like lesser than part-time. But this is the fight. I remember it was probably around maybe a week before Christmas. It aired in Australia. And I always remembered Ezra Sellers because he was always in great fights throughout his career. I mean, if you watch this one, you should go watch him versus Alex Stewart. There's like 7 knockdowns in the fight both ways. Eventually, Stewart outlasts him. This fight, there's 6 knockdowns, 4-2. And Carl Thompson was one of those guys that had a habit of coming back from the dead in fights. So, anyways, Sellers drops him heavy in round 1 with a right hook. Goes in to finish him and gets sprawled with a big right hand. Round 2, Sellers drops him again with a right hook. Guess what? Rushes in and the same thing happens. Gets dropped heavy with the right hand. But this time, he's more hurt than Thompson. Round 3, Sellers drops him with a right hook. Backs off, realizes not to go rushing in because he's going to get the receipt again. And then finally, back and forth action in the 4th round. Sellers levels him with another right hook, and it's fight over.
All right, so it's only 4 rounds, a quick one.
Yeah, it's a fight that we should showcase sometime on Classic Fights because for sure. It's an outstanding battle that, till the death, you don't know who's actually going to win the fight.
All right, well, maybe we'll have to check a few of these out and put them on our Classic Fights and review them in a bit more detail. All right, that was 3, so number 2.
Caesar's Palace, 1985. You know what it is.
Hagler Hearns.
Yep.
I just think 2, okay.
I just think that no matter what your preference is for fight styles or anything of that nature, that opening round is the greatest 3 minutes in the history of the sport. I don't think anyone can really question that. And when you look at the fact that it was such a huge moment in both fighters' careers, for Hagler, this was like his coming out party. This was his chance finally to be seen, his chance finally earn his respect. For Hearns, this is chasing legacy. He's taken the challenge that Leonard hadn't taken to that point. And this could erase any doubts that people had about Hearns. He just scored a spectacular one-round knockout over James Schuller, who was a top contender, and he filled out into middleweight quite well.
It was Fred Hutchins, I think, wasn't it? I think Schuller was
it
after.
Hutchins or Schuller?
I think Schuller was after. Yeah, I think it was it was Duran and then Hutchins. I think it was third round. I think it was.
Let me look this up.
Hey, I don't want to argue with you. You know better than what I do, but I just remember. I think it was Hutchins by third round knockout from memory.
I do remember he got Hutchins out of there, but I was sure it was Schuller leading into this. I might be wrong though. Hey, you're right. It was
hey,
Schuller
there you
go. It was Hutchins, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, like he looked great against Hutchins.
Yeah.
He looked great against Schuller after. I mean,
yeah, he did.
But it was Duran then Hutchins. You're correct.
Yeah.
But yeah, all of the build up was that Tommy was going to fill into the weight. But how's he going to deal with Hagler? Is Hagler going to be orthodox? Is he going to be southpaw? There was a lot of questions coming into it, and it delivered on every level, including the fact that it was a conclusive ending.
Yep.
One of those rare fights that someone gets stretched. It's like one of those rare fights that someone gets stretched, but it doesn't take away from their legacy.
No, it didn't, because it was such a great fight, and pretty much. And then we had the cut eye and and getting taken to the doctor.
Yep.
It was all happening, wasn't it?
Exactly.
All right, let's go to your all-time favourite fight ever. Who we got?
May 7, 2005, Mandalay Bay, WBO, WBC lightweight world title. Jose Luis Castillo versus Diego Corrales.
Yeah, well, I think someone actually asked that before, wasn't it? So Jose Luis Castillo. Sorry, Diego Corrales, Jose Luis Castillo. Yep.
This was essentially Hagler Hearns, but for 10 rounds.
Yep.
An incredible finish. I mean, Corrales spitting out the gum shield, being on the verge of being finished off, and then turning it around and stopping Castillo still on his feet in the final round. It's just incredible 2 minutes of action in that round.
And then Dan Goosen in the corner saying, "Show me something."
Yep. I mean, it was everything. I mean, and look, Corrales resourceful though. On those two knockdowns, he knew if he spat out the gum shield, it would buy him time. It's crafty. I mean, it's end of the day as a fighter, it's survival.
Yeah, that was. I think we've done that on Classic Fights, haven't we? So if you haven't seen it, guys, check it out. I'm going to pull a bit of a Swifty and see if I can actually bring it up as we go. I'm going to see if I can do it. All right, so it was Corrales and Castillo. I'm going to put this in there. See what other ones I can find as we're going. So which one? Oh, yep. So Fight of the Year. All right. I'm going to copy. Oh, hang on. And I'm going to put it in there. Did that happen? Oh, yep. There we go. It's I think it's up there. I don't know. Yeah. Click on it, guys. So there it is. There. That is Castillo and Corrales. If you haven't seen it. And
Perfect.
And good
point
must
there, watch.
James. Yep, for sure. It was just tragedy in that, wasn't it? Was that? I know it was a motorbike accident. What year was that, Mike? When he passed away?
It was just after the Clotty fight, so it would have been 2000. Was 2005?
Yeah.
No, later. I'm sure it's later. Let me look it up. Yeah. 2005, 2007. It's crazy how, like, when you're younger, your memory's so sharp on everything. Yeah, May 7, 2007.
Well, yeah, made Carl happy there. Had him as number one as well, that one.
Yeah, I mean, Corrales was one of those guys that it's strange with how recklessly he lived outside of the sport. Yeah. He was always bound to have that kind of tragic ending. It's just sad though, because I think as an elite fighter he was finished, but he's the kind of guy that you would have loved to have his energy at the International Boxing Hall of Fame and these kind of occasions in this era.
No, for sure, mate. Well, there you go. So I'll put it back up there, guys. Oh, it's in the comments anyway, but there it is there. Hang on. No, that was that it? Yeah. Gatti Rodriguez, Zapavinia, or Zappa we'll call him. How do you pronounce that?
Suchia. Yeah.
Yep. Sellers, Thompson, Hagler, Hearns, Corrales. and Castillo. All right, let's get into... I'll just take that off there. Where are we? Yeah. All right, so the top 10 Aussie performances of all time. So I stipulated at the start of the show, it's not the best wins of all time, but the best performances. Now, quickly before we put yours up, Mike, I'm going to just give you a quick look at mine for everyone. Just a quick run over for 30 seconds. There's mine. So I had Waters and Norris at number 10. Lester Ellis 1, Cool 85, Gill, Sturm 2012, Carruthers, Tawil in 52, Harding, Andrews 89, Cambosis, Lopez 21, Famishon, Legra 69, Rhodes, Harada 65, Fennick Nelson 91, and Jeff Horn, Manny Pacquiao. So they're my top 10 Aussie performances of all time. So, all right, so we'll go back to that. All right, mate, so let's start with number 10.
All right, we're going to February 2nd, 1946.
Oh, jeez, okay. Yeah.
Sydney Stadium, Australian welterweight title. 2 Australians, one ranked in the top 10 in the world at lightweight, one ranked in the top 10 in the world at welterweight. Vic Patrick against Tommy Burns. Vic Patrick come in 43-2.
Yep.
Tommy Burns 47-1-4. Vic Patrick weighed 136 pounds for the weigh-in of the fight. Put that in context. He weighed 136. So
what was the fight at?
147.
Okay.
He weighed 136. He genuinely was giving away 2 weights, stepped up. They packed out Sydney Stadium, and he knocks out Burns in the 9th round. Again, like I've said to you time and again, context matters. Vic Patrick was number 1 in the world for a number of years, like how Jack Carroll was before him at lightweight. I think that in this day and age, undoubtedly Vic Patrick would have won a world title.
Now, I actually got pulled up the other day by Uncle Ronnie Picken. I don't know if you've met Uncle. He's obviously involved with it. Now, he actually pulled me up on my list. He watched it and said, Lyndon, I love you. Where was Tommy Burns and Vic Patrick? That's what he said to me. So, obviously, he knows his stuff. He's obviously in his early 80s, so he probably would have watched it back then. But yeah, that's what he said. Now, actually, with a quick comment here, no Costa-Zoo, that was on my list. Carl, look, it was not an honorary mention, I will say, but I must have been on my list. I know I'm going to create some controversy here, but it was Australian. Now, Costa, I love him. Everyone in Australia loves him, but for me, I always probably more rated him as a Russian fighter who was based in Australia for his career and then went home. So I'm not really rated, even though the Zabjuda thing was amazing and all of Australia was behind him. I've just sort of factored that in, that he was a Russian fighter who, had his career and then went home. And so I know you might disagree, and that's fine, but that was just my
No, I'm with you. I'm with you. Otherwise, my list will be listed with Costa and also Vic Darchinyan.
Yeah, exactly. So, Vic is in the same boat. And we love them, but at the end of the day, they were foreign fighters who were just based here. I know Costa ended up being a citizen and everything else, but the facts are, when his career was over, he went back to Russia. So, anyway, that was the criteria. So, just to clarify that. All right, mate, let's get on to number 9.
It's actually, I think you had this at 10, right? Lester Ellis versus Juan Kill Yu.
Number 9, I had it. Yep, same thing.
15th of Feb, 1985. I think that when you talk about performances for a kid at 14-0, only been pro a few years.
19 years of age.
19 years of age to step up and fight a guy 25-1-3 and a hard and tough guy. And I know the IBF was still in its infancy, but Juan Kill Yu was a really solid fighter. You look at, he had one fight post Leicester, and the guy that he beat was a top tier contender, out of Korea as well. So when you look at the context of Leicester being able to step up to that occasion and the discipline to be able to, both feet blistered, and he was able to keep turning and keep boxing him for 15 rounds, in and out, work off the jab. Like a lot of people remember Leicester as a ferocious body snatcher and for being a real hard and tough infighting puncher. But that fight, he was on his toes relentlessly for 15 rounds. He knew that he needed to keep Juan Kill Yu turning, keep him off balance, and I just thought he boxed brilliantly.
And I thought that too, mate. I went through the same thing. I know Juan Kill Yu, he's not an Azuma Nelson, he's not a Teofimo Lopez, I understand that, but the performance by Leicester, being a 19-year-old kid, like you said, 14 fights. I know the Sachula fight was a tough fight, but Sachula wasn't, right at the upper echelon as well. So, and the fact that he got in there, he had the pressure of the crowd. 15-round fight, by the way. No 12-round fights here. It was 15 rounds with all that pressure on him, and to put out that performance, brilliant. And I just remember, I think I was, geez, you would have been, about 1 year old when it was on. I was about, I think I was 11, when the fight was 11, maybe nearly 12, I think it was. But I still remember staying up and watching it, and it's one of the highlights of all time for me, watching that fight. Because when they lifted him up to the ceiling, I think I was going up with him, like all the other Australians out there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I have to, for those that don't know, so I've written a two-part film script to Lester's career.
Yeah, tell us about it.
Part one essentially focuses on Lester's journey to becoming the world champion against One Kill You. And so in researching that, I had all the insights from Lester, from the family, about his preparation of how, like, for One Kill You, essentially, they went and stayed in Bacchus Marsh, and Lester was living in a caravan for basically 6-7 weeks to prepare. So he just literally no TV, nothing. He had a radio, he had a few magazines. He'd go train, go rest in the caravan, and that was his basis for the camp. So he was legitimately hungry. He was extremely well prepared, extremely well conditioned, and like I said, the kind of maturity he reflected on that night was well beyond his years.
Yeah, he was, and you just forget how young that was, don't you? At 19, it's just amazing. So, and I just said the other night too, mate, when I said it too, there's no mistake. I think we might have actually talked about it on the Dream Fight that you don't get many people that talk shit about Lester Ellis. He's one of the most respected and admired fighters of all time in Australia. And you look back in the day when they had the kids running after him on the street and people writing things on the road, and everyone loved Lester, and he was such a great guy. And to this day, I mean, I haven't seen him for many years, but I know you keep in contact with him, and I know he's active in the gyms with his boys, so that's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, mate, number 8.
Number 8, so actually this is a very recent fight. Jai Opetaia, cruiserweight world title victory over Maris Breedis.
I thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
That's a world number 1 cruiserweight. And when you put it in context, I mean, people can say Breedis is 36 years of age, but his only loss, which was like a 7-5 kind of deal, was to Alexander Usyk, who just about everyone has in their top 5 pound-for-pound fighters.
Yep.
And if he's in your top 5 pound for pound, but you got him ranked at number 2 at heavyweight to Fury, then you're basically saying that he was a dominant force at cruiserweight. And Breedis pushed him 7-5. It was a coin flip kind of fight. So I think that Breedis, dominant contender over the weight, another guy that had a lot of quality to his record, and people can maybe say Jai caught him at the right time, but I just subscribe to the belief that Jai lifted to the level and brought all of his potential to the forefront. He was one of the best junior amateurs in the world. He was top 10 in the world coming out of the 2012 Olympics as an amateur, and he's brought it to the professional and proven all of his quality.
I must admit, I did cop a little bit of flack about that one, and I felt a little bit guilty after that one. It was an honorary mention. It's hard to squeeze them all in. I must admit it was that close, but I sort of kept him out. But in hindsight, I probably should have found a spot for him because it was an unbelievable performance, especially with the jaw and everything as well. So, no arguments there, mate. Number 7.
So number 7, I've got Jeff Horn defeating Manny Pacquiao.
Number 7, he was my number 1.
I had Pacquiao winning the fight. I can't put it number 1 when I'm not going to sit here and lie just because the decision rolled his way. Ringside, I had it 7-5 Pacquiao. So
I had it the other way, but no arguments there.
So that changes your context of how you personally perceive it.
Yeah,
I thought it was a great performance, and I would still, even if it rolled Pacquiao's way, I would still have it on this list because Pacquiao's a legend, and still went on to some terrific victories thereafter. But Pacquiao wasn't the number 1 welterweight in the world at that time, and I think that's what probably has this also at this part of the list rather than 2 or 3. I think that had he defeated the Pacquiao that was burning through the entire weight class pre-Mayweather, completely different. But this is a Pacquiao that had been knocked out by Marquez at this point, dropped that controversial decision to Bradley. You know, it kind of was starting to show some some signs of slowing down in his fights. So I think that, though, outstanding performance for Horn. I remember people involved in Pacquiao's camp saying that, Manny would need to trip on the way to the ring in order to lose the fight. And I think that they just completely slept on this Australian kid because they didn't comprehend how awkward and unorthodox Jeff was. And look, I know that Glenn Rushton gets a lot of flack, especially off people within the Australian boxing community. But you can't fault the way that Glenn had built Jeff Horn to that point of his career to mentally rise to the occasion. Jeff walked into the ring that day like it was just another day at the office, whereas many other fighters, the occasion would defeat him already in advance. But Jeff just went out there and it was just another fight. Yeah, it was just another fight and just another opponent. And it was that afternoon at Suncorp Stadium was a great environment. It's one of the few times I've been amongst such a large boxing crowd in Australia where you felt safe and secure.
Yeah, it was massive, and I've commented about this before, but the week in Brisbane at the main hotel there, where everyone was, I think we just sat there all day, just drinking coffee and just mingling with the whole boxing fraternity for the week. It was awesome, and it's probably something you haven't really seen in Australia. It's always something you do when you're in Vegas or whatever it might be, so to have it in Australia was awesome. Of course, the recent Kambosos-Haney fight, that probably the first one was pretty similar, but I remember that, the 50,000 people there, was a beautiful day, great fight. One thing I will say with it though, Mike, I just get a little bit bent out of shape sometimes when people say that Pacquiao was just ripped blind. It was a close fight, could have went either way. I don't think he was ripped off. He just lost a close fight. I'm not arguing that he might have got the decision, but to say it was blatantly ripped off, I just don't think that's the case. But I suppose everyone's entitled to.
No, I didn't think watching it like I was about 5 rows back. Yeah. 5 rows back, it was a coin flip kind of fight.
Yeah.
And there was everyone around me had it kind of different ways. Some had it 7-5 Jeff, others had it, 6 rounds apiece. No one really knew.
Yeah, I had it 7-5 to Horn, but there's a lot of close rounds, and everyone sort of keeps coming back to that 9th round. One round doesn't win you the fight, especially when you don't knock the guy down, So
this is what a lot of people don't understand about boxing scoring is that. That's one round. There's 12 fights. In a 12-round fight, there's 12 fights. Yeah. If you win 7 of them and you don't get knocked down, you win. Doesn't matter if you just won that fight or if you if you got battered in that fight but didn't get battered to a 10-8 situation. Yeah. And that's I remember Brad Vicali said it to me many years ago. He said that where people go wrong in boxing is that they don't think of every round as an individual fight. They carry over baggage from the previous rounds.
Yep.
So that fight's a good example. Jeff Horn got battered in the 9th, but he come back and outboxed Pacquiao in the 10th. But a lot of people, by default of the fact he was hurt, just gave the round to Pacquiao.
Yeah, well, I still don't think. I mean, I could see the argument for it. I still didn't think it was a 10-8 round. I mean, he dominated the round, but I didn't think it was. I mean, I'm not going to argue if someone had it 10-8, but I didn't have a 10-8. I thought he dominated the round. He had Jeff shaky, but I don't think he was actually in danger of going down or he was staggered or whatever. So, but it's a little bit like tennis, I think, isn't it, though, mate? Where it's a game by game, set by set thing that determines the winner. It's not just one. You might win one set 6-0 and you lose the other set 7-6. I mean, it's just the way it goes, So, anyway. On the number 6 there, mate, we just got a comment from James. Hussein Jorge Arce, and Nadal Hussein Pacquiao. Yeah, great fights they were, James, for sure. They were both very close.
Yeah, both very close. They would be in my top 20 to 25, both of those.
Hard to squeeze them
I think
all
also, I think Hussey is saying against Pongsaklek Wonjongam, who was a dominant world champion, Hussey completely pushed him to the max as well. And right, Skinny really...
Oh, sorry?
Yeah, really should have got the victory against Pacquiao, but he didn't. And then, it was, like I said, just misses the list.
Yeah.
So, number 6, another one you won't have, October 3rd, 1951, Chicago Stadium.
Okay.
Dave Sands versus Carl Bobo Olsen 2. Yep. So they'd previously fought in Australia, and Sands was granted the decision, but there was a lot of conjecture. And this fight essentially was to determine the top-tier contender in the world to Ray Robinson. And just think about this. So Dave Sands goes over to the United States, 25 years of age, right? a guy, what's a guy? A guy on the way up who's never fought for a world title now, 25 years of age. They might be, 15 and 0, 20 and 0, maybe a
Maybe
max.
20 no. Yep.
Dave Sands, 81 wins, 9 losses, 1 draw.
That's
Just a completely
25-year-old.
different era. Bobo Olsen, 46 and 4. And this is a very significant fight because it's the first ever fight that's televised countrywide in the United States. That's picked up on all networks throughout the United States. And for that reason, it's probably one of the most significant bouts in Australian boxing history, despite being a non-title bout. But Sands wins this one definitively. He fades late, but he wins this bout definitively, a 10-round decision. Now, where context matters, I always say this here, where context matters. I mean, one, it's Chicago Stadium. Two, it's Bobo Olsen. Bobo Olsen goes on to win the middleweight world title. His only losses for the next 6 years are to Robinson, Sugar Ray Robinson, the greatest fighter of all time, and to the greatest light heavyweight of all time in Archie Moore. For the next 6 years, that's his only losses. You've got to put in context, this is an era where guys fought anyone and everyone.
Well, I didn't know that, mate. I obviously knew a lot about Dave Sands. Probably not enough as I should. But so how good a fighter was Dave Sands, and how much did we miss out on by his death?
Well, just to go to what was historically said. Sugar Ray Robinson always said, to fight that guy, you'd have to pay me a lot of money. That says everything. Think that, he twice beat Bobo Olsen, who went on to win the world title. There's no doubt when you look at him stylistically, he matched up pretty well against Ray Robinson. I think he had all the capability to beat Robinson, especially coming into that like mid-50s era. Robinson had slowed down enough that someone like Sands could outbox him. I know that Robinson avenged the loss of Turpin, but if Turpin can outbox him, if Gene Fullmer could out-hustle him once, Sands had all the capability. And we're talking about the greatest fighter ever. That's the thing. This is a guy everyone considers the greatest fighter ever. And I'm saying to you, I would have been confident Sands could knock him off at middleweight. He was an outstanding fighter, just an outstanding fighter. And it's a shame. Two things it's a shame. It's a shame that he never received his shot because of his tragic death. But I think it's also a shame that he grew up in an era that TV was still in its infancy. And so I think a lot of his legacy hasn't been preserved how it should within Australia.
Quick question before we move on to number 5, mates, from Carl. Do you guys think the 10-10 round seems to be a thing of the past? I find it crazy that if you don't see a clear winner, it should be a 10-all round. I must admit, I'm not a fan of the 10-all round, Carl. I like to find a winner one way or another, but that's just me. What do you think, Mike?
I think that if you're going to score around 10-10, it's got to be an exception where there's literally nothing to separate them. And I think that the problem is in the past, if you go and look at scorecards from the 80s, even into like the 90s, you see a lot of 114, 118, 114, and that's 4 10-10 rounds. That's just lazy judging.
Yeah.
And I think that that's the sanctioning bodies have cracked down on the fact they don't want to see 10-10 rounds because of that. It's just lazy judging, and it can sway about.
Sorry, mate, I was just going to say, the Leonard Duran first fight, was it like some of them had like 8 rounds or 9 rounds even? It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, it's just, it was very much reflective of that era, but it's just extremely lazy patterns. I think that there's probably, I can only speak from my own perspective, from sitting ringside at fights, there's probably 1 in every 100 rounds that I would consider scoring 10-10. I think that usually you can find something to separate the two. Whether you're right or wrong, you use the criteria of effective aggression and clean punching. I think that you can generally find the winner of the round.
Hey, quick one for you again off topic. I've just thought of this one while we're just talking about this one. Do you think that championship fights or even most fights should be uneven rounds rather than even rounds so we eliminate the draw?
Well, you would think that, but I remember being at a show in Melbourne a few years back that had 2 5-rounders and both of them ended up in draws, so that didn't work out too well either. Fair
enough.
No, the WBA's actually introduced a lot of the regional titles in North and South America, 11-round fights for that reason.
Yeah.
But no, UFC's 5 rounds as well, but I just think that, technically, it helps to separate them, but what if there's a knockdown?
Yeah, exactly, and or an even round, whatever. Yeah, you're right. I hear you. All right, we'll get on to another one before I get a couple more comments there. Number 5.
Okay. So, what was the cover of this one called? Was it called The Conquest, I think, at the video store back in the day?
Yeah, was that the Conquest? That was Harding Andrews, wasn't it? No,
Correct.
was it?
24th of June, 1989.
That'd
Yep,
be
Jeff
it.
Harding versus
Yep,
Dennis Andres won. I
yep.
think that what's incredible, so light heavyweight world title, everyone, if they're listening to this program, should know the narrative. Jeff Harding comes roaring from behind to stop Andres in the 12th round and become Australia's first ever light heavyweight world champion. Think that, again, where you got to look at the context, he was 14-0
Yeah.
and took the fight at short notice. Harding wasn't. People knew his quality as an amateur. He was fast tracked a bit in the pros, but no one was no one was underlining and highlighting him as a guy that was a surefire world champion. But he took this moment and rolled with it into a really, really strong and respectable career.
No, he did. I just remember watching it I spent a Sunday afternoon, I suppose, and I think we all remember Jeff Fennick jumping up and down at ringside. I think we're all doing that on our couches at home. It was an amazing win. You know, he had blood there. He was way behind on points. It was the Rocky moment, wasn't it? It was amazing. I've got a quick question here from Justin Footet, who wants to ask you: are you still repping for Top Rank?
No, no, no. Long done with working with Top Rank in terms of any official capacity, but still tight with the company. Of course, I'm head of talent development now for Probellum, so that's my main priority, and also running my own management company. But still got a good rapport with all of the office brass at Top Rank nowadays. Carl Moretti, Brad Goodman, Brad Jacobs, all good people to work with.
Good stuff, mate. All right, number 4.
Number 4, are we up to 4? Oh yeah, we are.
Yep.
Wait. I think we've got one missing. One second.
Oh, hang on, yeah.
We're at number 3, I'm sure. Oh no, we're at number 4. No, you're correct.
Yep.
I miscounted. Number 4. You're not going to be happy with me putting this one at 4, but I will.
All right. The date, yeah.
Jeff Fennick versus Azuma Nelson.
Number 4. Okay.
Number 4.
Number 4. Okay. Oh, what have I done? Oh,
And of course, today, Jeff Fennick retroactively given the World Championship for this
I saw
outlet.
that. Yeah.
So,
and
yeah,
we
so
actually broached it on our show.
yeah, so the WBC, of course, after 30-odd years, finally decided to conduct a review of the bout, had independent judges reflect and rescore the bout, all found it to be a landslide decision for Fennick, and today he was officially granted his 4th World Championship from the WBC. Now, it's not going to change the record.
I was going to say, it doesn't affect the result, does it?
No, the Nevada Commission's not going to overturn the result.
Not after 30 years.
It's some sense of justice for Jeff. I think that, you know, I've heard the story on this fight from both sides, from Jeff's and from Azuma's. And I just think that, you know, there's no way to measure. You can measure on Azuma if Azuma felt he wasn't right. Azuma said he had malaria or whatever, right? You can say, okay, he had a chance to adjust. But I don't think there's any way to calculate what Jeff Fennick lost in terms of hunger and drive as a fighter from being heartbroken and being shortchanged on a fight that he outrightly won. I mean, it's a 9-round to 3, 10-round to 2 kind of deal.
Yeah.
And just an outstanding performance by Jeff. Deserved to be a four weight class world champion. I think that the tough part with the context of that is, okay, now they've granted him the belt, but it's just a great gesture. It doesn't undo 30 years of torment. And
I agree, and I think it was a classic case. Forget the malaria. I just think Azuma Nelson, like a lot of champions have done against Aussies, have totally underestimated them, and they've paid the price. And I'm with you. I might have given Nelson 3 rounds, but I think Jeff would probably be humbled by it, but it still doesn't take away. I agree with you. It doesn't take away the fact he wasn't officially given the belt, and I think even to this day it sort of grinds him a little bit, but. Hey, it's better than nothing, I suppose, and it's good to see that the WBC watch boxing deep dive with our classic fight. So if you haven't seen it, we had Jeff on the show to review that fight, and we pushed it on the night that hey, we've got to start a campaign to get Jeffy's 4th title. So we think we've got a bit of influence out there. I don't think we have, but you never know. All right, so that was number 4. Number 3.
Number 3, Johnny Famagin versus Jose Legra.
Yeah, now we're talking. I think we're very similar on this one. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the context of this fight, Legra was a very solid, very strong, very dominant champion, and Famo was still young. He had developed, he had learned on the job. He had no amateur career, and he went over there and was completely underestimated by Legra's team and just boxed smart, boxed him in and out. And again, it's a kind of performance. You go watch it on YouTube. It's not going to be scintillating performance because you're not seeing everything rapid fire or combinations, but it's a discipline. It's Famo's discipline to constantly keep that lead left hand elongated, to hold him at range, to keep that right hand glued, plastered to the side of his head, to only throw the right hand sparingly when he'd find Legra overreaching, and to go out and outbox a Cuban over 15 rounds like that. It's a phenomenal effort, a phenomenal performance, and I think that, like I said, maybe Famo, because he's not, he wasn't the most personable guy then in terms of his fighting style. Outside the ring, he was personable, but in terms of his fighting style, I think sometimes historically he gets underrated too.
He does, and I think I went through this when I did my list, that Legra's was 105 wins and 4 or 5 losses, and I think he'd won 78 or something of his last 79 fights. So he's no slouch, and obviously it was in England as well, so Johnny had to go over there and fight him. So it was all against him, and just an unbelievable performance by Johnny Famagin. So I agree with that. I think I might have had that at number 3 or maybe 4 as well, I think. So
yeah.
All right, so we're now into the main 2. Number 2, who have you got?
The crazy part is, in reviewing these fights, I realise half the fights fall on the 15th of the month. It has to be something to do with boxing history,
in
right?
The stars, yep.
15th for the 11th, 1952, Rand Stadium, South Africa. Jimmy Carruthers drops 140 punches on Vic Towell in under 2 minutes. Now, put it in context, Carruthers really secured the shot by being the best fighter in the Commonwealth and was an exceptional amateur. But Towell's one of the greatest South African fighters ever. 26-0-1. Carruthers was 14-0. And maybe they were sleeping on him a little bit. Carruthers wasn't renowned as being a brutal power puncher. You know what I'm saying? But speed and combinations, and annexed the Bantamweight World Championship in under 2 minutes. I think they were shell-shocked. Of course, they rematched, and Carruthers did a number on him again. But I just think that when you look at the context, that realistically, we can talk about Australian history. There's young Griffo, there's Les Darcy. They claim versions of the world title. Jimmy Carruthers was our first actual world champion.
Yep.
Legitimate, unquestionable world champion.
And no sanctioning bodies, it was just the one title.
Yeah, it was just the world title. It wasn't this version, it was the world title. And I think that you got to put it in context what a great moment that was for the sport in our country, and how many people that inspired. I mean, you look at post-fact Carruthers, how many great fighters then at bantamweight from Fenwick. Well, let's go before Fenwick. From say Gadalari, there's Ali Bennett in the same era. You got Lionel Rose. Then you've got Fenwick. You had Paul Ferrari before Fenwick. Now
that was an underrated performance too, wasn't it? Ferrari and Zarate.
Ferrari and Carlos Zarate, yeah. Like Ferrari was a hell of a fighter. If he was in this era, he'd be a world champion. And then you go to modern day. We've got Jason Maloney right up there, number 1 in the world.
Yep.
Like our history at bantamweight is pretty rich, given how small a country we are.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's been an awesome one. So I've got a feeling I know what number 1 is, but let us hear it.
Number 1 is Grant Tassie Brown versus Mario Terry.
Hey, you better tell him you're joking about that, because you'll be texting me in a minute saying, hey.
That'll guarantee he listens to this. Yeah, of course. Who else? Lionel Rose.
Yeah.
Going into the Lions Den in Tokyo, Japan, and upending the great world champion, Japan's greatest fighter ever, the great Fighting Harada. I think that the cherry on top is to go out there and outbox him in his own backyard at 19 years of age.
Yeah, he's only
Unified world
19 as
title.
well.
Yeah.
Jeez, I didn't know that.
Just outrageous. It's outrageous when you think of. And I don't know if any Australian ever is going to ascend that performance on one singular night. You know, it's just an outstanding night for the sport. And, of course, our first ever Indigenous world champion as well. So, historically, a very, very significant night. But just to me, just the calmness of Lionel Rose to go over there and be able to box and find his rhythm and really finish. He finished strong the last 5-6 rounds in that bout with Harada. And like I've said before, I mean, you look at Harada. Harada beat Etta Joffrey twice. Mm-hmm. Had Harada never beat Joffrey, Joffrey's in consideration for maybe the top 5 to 10 greatest fighters of all time, all weight classes, pound for pound. So you look at the context of it. I mean, Harada was a terrific fighter. Lionel caught him in his prime because Harada still come back and had that first bout with Johnny Famagin for the featherweight world title, which was a controversial decision in Famo's favour. So it's not like as though Lionel caught him on a bad night or at the end of his career. He caught a great champion, but he was just greater on that particular night. And for me, that's the crowning moment in Australian boxing history. But I'll say this, just in reviewing these fights, there's another 30 I had to leave off the list that makes me feel bad. I mean, you look at Daniel Gill versus Felix Sturm. Yeah, that great performance to go to Russia, Germany and beat him in his own backyard. You look at Katsides. Look at Katsides pushing Juan Manuel Marquez to the absolute limit. Yep. Katsides versus Joel Casamayor. Like, these are fights that probably don't even make the top 20, the top 25. But when you look at them in context, I mean, we have to appreciate what our fighters have achieved. Tony Mundine outboxing Emil Griffith. That's another one that we've got to look at and see. Okay, where does that fall in terms of historical context? So there's a lot, and I know that people always kind of probably roll their eyes when I'm bringing out a fight from the 1930s to 40s.
No, I love it.
I would love to come back someday with this program where we do it decade by decade. We can go back to 1900 and do the top 5 most significant wins of each decade, because then it gives people a real decent, solid appreciation of every era that our sport's been through.
Hey, I love it. I love the idea of doing a decade by decade, a week on week sort of thing. Pick a particular decade and go through the top fights. I mean, if people out there want to watch it, I think it's great, and especially if you guys out there are, especially if you're a newer fan of the sport in the last few years, what better way to do it than with you on here, mate? It's awesome. So this is Outlaw Boxing Club. Thanks for coming on, mate. So this is my list here, just to review. So I think we had pretty much the same top 4. You didn't have Kambosos and Lopez in there, which surprised me. Apart from that,
No, because I again, context. Could it make it? Yeah, but Lopez prepared like it was a carnival.
Yeah.
So he was completely unprepared for the fight. And great performance. Could it possibly make it? Yeah, I wouldn't argue with anyone rating it in the list. To me, that falls probably in the 10 to 20 because of the fact that Teofimo Lopez was so ill prepared for the fight.
And the thing I must admit too, mate, I went with as well, with Lopez as well, is that even though everyone, he's one of the pound for pound and this and that, I know he had the win over Lomachenko, but apart from that, it was probably Komny, and that was probably really about it. Lomachenko was obviously his biggest win, but apart from that, he was a young kid who had a great win. Pretty hard to put him ahead of Johnny Famashon and Lionel Rose and Fennick and Jeff Horn. But the fight itself, to be dropped in the 10th round, to come back and then win the next 2 rounds and take the belt over there, it was a great performance. So James has got a question here, Mike. Most significant fight in Australia, Jack Johnson. Obviously that was against, was it Tommy Burns back on the day?
Tommy Burns. Yeah, probably so. Again, it's a thing where context matters, and that's a fight that forever shone the light on Australian boxing throughout history. And you got to think as well, Australia really is still at that stage in its infancy as a country. So it was something new and different, and would have enlightened a lot of people as to what Australia actually was. So yeah, definitely, I think that yeah, it's hard to argue that there would be any more significant fight. I mean, you could bring out Tyson Fury now for a world title defence here, and it wouldn't even be anywhere near comparable
So,
to that.
so just on the significant sort of fights, in your opinion, what is the biggest fight? I'm assuming it's along those lines. What is the biggest fight that's taken place in Australia? Is it that one, or is it another one? I still think, I know you're going to differ to what I'm going to say, but I still think the Horn-Pacquiao fight is the biggest fight to take place here because of the stature of Pacquiao. I know he mightn't have been his best, but this is an absolute superstar of the sport that was out here. Yeah, it's debatable whether it was the best performance. You know, you had him at 4, I had him at 1. But do you think that's the biggest fight to take place here, or was this one or another one?
I would say there's probably two that are a shade over it,
Yep.
which are both in this era. I think that definitely most significant fight is Burns and Jack Johnson.
Okay. Yep.
But in terms of say talking modern era, I think that Green and Mundine, in terms of Australia per capita,
Yep.
there's no bigger than Green and Mundine.
Yep.
But Fennick and Nelson too, you can't underestimate
That was
how
massive,
much
yeah.
coverage and how much pull and how big a spectacle that was either. You know, and if that was in this era, that surpasses the numbers of Horn and Pacquiao and all
Yeah.
those fights.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree, and I'm with you that Green Mundine's a little bit of a different basket. Is it the biggest fight that's taken place in Australia? No, but is it the biggest fight that's taken place in Australia? Then yes. You know what I mean? Like it's as far as the credentials of both of them and where they stood in the scheme of things. I know in Australia they were big, but internationally, neither one of them was really. You know, well, maybe they were, but you know what I mean? Like, they weren't a Nelson or a Fennick or a, you know, whatever, even Haney and Cambosis recently, that sort of thing. But in as far as Australian boxing fans' view, it was massive. And it probably is, that was probably the biggest one, probably prior to Alice and Michael, I'm probably thinking, unless you can think of another one.
No, I think that's an accurate assessment. Yeah.
And look, there's so many different ways to assess. It's like we always do with pound for pound and, you know, all the rest of it. I mean, I went through the top 50 that the Herald Sun did on the weekend, and geez, you know, it's so hard. Is it, you know, do you go for a Paulo Acuso, who's a brilliant young fighter, or Garside that's only had 2 or 3 fights? Do you rank them above a Dennis Hogan because they might be better ability-wise, but Hogan's obviously an IBO world champion, had many fights. You know what I mean? It's very, very tough to rate these guys, as it's like ranking these as well. Rowan, thanks for your comment here, mate. Very unfair of Cambosis, in my opinion, just due to rumours of pre-fight medicals. Recency biased or not, that performance was incredible. Yeah, well, there you go. What do you say to that, Mike?
Yeah, that's fair enough. I'll cop that assessment. You know, I think that I look at a lot of things. A lot of things are going to take shape historically on what both fighters achieve from here in too.
Yeah.
I think that if Teofimo's career goes on a trajectory where he's able to recapture a world title, then maybe that changes the context of how that's perceived historically as well. Like I said, I still perceive it as a top 10 to 20 fight of all time. So that's not to say that it isn't significant. I just feel I found 10 more significant fights.
Yeah, and as I said, it's a hard one. I think, what did I have him? Number 5, I think it was. But I mean, geez, you talked about him fights as we're going. I mean, I forgot about Ferrari's Arate. He didn't get the win, of course, and maybe it's not worthy of being in the top 10. But yeah, there's so many great fighters out there. And someone mentioned before Danny Green, Marcus Bay. I'm not sure it would have been the greatest win of all time. It still would have been a significant win going to Germany and winning. And he had that fight on toast. I still can't believe he did what he did. Unfair disqualification. But at the end of the day, I don't think they had a choice. But that's another argument. But
yeah. And another one too, Carly Meehan and Lehman Brewster. I mean, given it was for a version of their heavyweight world title, and arguably Carly Meehan won that fight. I know they rolled the other way, but that's another one that, like I said, that falls in that probably 15 to 30 basket thereabouts. That's why I said I'd like to do like a decade breakdown, because there's so many more fights that we could pull out. Even you go to days of the likes of Ron Retchage, Jack Carroll. There's wins that Jack Carroll accomplished.
He was in your top 10, wasn't he?
Borderline. Yeah, and deservedly so. I think I had him number 6 all-time Australian fighters. I mean, again, context matters. He was number 1 in the world for 4 years. How do you stack that up to now? How do you stack that? That's what is that equivalent to in this era? You know what I'm saying? Like, it's he might have even having him at number 6 might have been too low.
And I didn't have him in my top 10. I must admit, I felt a little bit embarrassed after that event. Now, that was actually our first ever show, I think, or first or second ever special that we did. I reckon we might be time to redo it. I reckon
The second show, you guys all executed me for having Harry Greb in my top 10 greatest fighters ever.
Yeah.
And all my friends who watched it were like, "How can you have him that low?"
That low, okay.
Yeah, they were ashamed of me for having him in. I think I had him number 6 or 7, something like that.
And those other peanuts didn't even have him in the top 10. I was a little bit embarrassed, I must admit. Hey, look, I suppose it comes down to it's what you sort of know. Now, I make no apologies that even though I know a bit about boxing before the 70s, I haven't really taken an interest in it. And does that make me a boxing historian? No, it doesn't. I won't profess to be one. I know my boxing from the 70s onwards. So it's each sort of what you know, and that's. But you obviously, and I think Peter's a little bit the same. You guys know your boxing from way back then. What decade would you start with, though, if you did a decade by decade one? Would you go back to right at the start of the century, or?
Yeah, I would go a broad spectrum. I would go say 1890 to
1890.
I'd go 18.
Okay.
I'd go 1890 to 1910.
Okay. Okay, so a
Then
20-year span. Okay.
Yeah, I'd go 20. I'd go 1910 to 1930.
Okay.
And then after 1930, I would go decade by decade.
Okay, well, let's do it. If you can find a night that you're free, happy to come on. As it says, we're talking boxing, so people can either come on and talk boxing or not. We can do it every night of the week. I'm sure our partners will be happy, and wives and everything, but anyway. But no, look, mate, it was great to have you on to do it. I think we should do a lot more of it. I really like the idea. That's why I've got the talking boxing concept, because that's exactly what it is. It's just talking boxing, whatever we feel like talking about. I do my little bit on a Monday night where I vent for a couple of hours, but it's great to have someone like you on that really knows their stuff and gives our audience a little bit more perspective on what goes on in this sport than has for decades.
No, I appreciate it. And hopefully some of the audience will go out and watch a few Takanori Hatakayame fights again tonight.
Well, what I'll do, when I'll put the links to the fights in the description when I re-edit this when it goes on YouTube, and hopefully that'll be good for you guys out there to click on. I'm assuming there'll at least be highlights of some of these fights, if not the full fights, but I'll put the link on there and check them out. But no, that was awesome, mate. Really enjoyed that tonight. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on, and we'll see. Hopefully next week we'll have Tassie back for our regular classic fights and dream fights, and can't wait to see them, mate. But thanks again for coming on.
I still can't believe that if Tassie edits it correctly, he's going to hear me say the most significant fight in Aussie history was him knocking out Mark
all over Instagram.
Definitely. Absolute pleasure. Appreciate you giving me the platform to come and share some views and chat boxing.
Awesome, mate. Good stuff. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you, Lyndon.
See you, mate.